In this episode of Building a Better Shooter, we'll talk about Blake Liles' class, Charlie Perez's book, my journey heading toward my first major as an open shooter, and all this other stuff you're used to. Are you ready? Stand by. Welcome back. I'm glad you could join me for another month here at Building a Better Shooter. And this month, right after the last episode, I went to a training class. So I'm going to tell you about Blake Liles' training class out at 415training.com. And for those of you not familiar with Blake Liles, he is the 2020 Area 4 champion. He is a USPSA Grand Master in Open Division, and he's got his training business 415 Training. Blake has a private range about 2 hours west of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's got 3 bays there where he's able to do pretty much whatever he wants, and he's got a couple different classes that he runs. So I won a certificate to go train with Blake for a one-day class back at the North Texas Open last year. So me and another open shooter who is a B class decided to go out together and train with Blake for the day, and it was a great class. Now, the class that we took wasn't his typical level 1 stuff, which covers everything from like basic marksmanship on up to a sort of advanced movement sort of skills. And then he's got a level 2 class as well, and he's developing a new class that he refers to as the training box. So what we did was spend about an hour and a half or so on the concepts of his level 1 class. Just like most of these classes, you shoot a sample stage with Blake and he will kind of critique you, and then he will demo it as well. And it is a bit of a hoser stage, and me being in kind of my upper 30s in reasonably good shape, Blake's a little bit heavier set and in his early 50s with a bad knee, and Blake ate my lunch on the demo stage. He got me by over 2 seconds. So it goes to show that Blake is a highly efficient shooter. So Blake, if you hear this, I'm not making fun of you. I'm just highlighting the fact that you're able to make the most of what you've got going on, and he's able to help other people see that as well. So we spent the morning learning the concepts from his sort of level 1 class, making sure we understand the language that he uses when he's coaching, and then we got into more of what the training box is. Now, the training box is sort of a sample stage that he has set up. Now, the training box and what it is basically a small USPSA sample stage where he can set up little miniature drills of like 5 to 7 rounds if he needs to, or as much as 20 to 24 rounds depending on what you're testing. He can set up one skill to test it in isolation, or he can string it together with a couple other ones and allow you to repeat it and get several reps in sort of like a match type scenario on pertinent skills. And to that point, about 80% of what we worked on was movement, which was what I really needed as sort of a budding open shooter. I kind of thought about it after his class, and my big issue is when I went from production, which was basically like stand and blast sprint from point to point, to trying to figure out how to stitch positions together, is I pretty much just stopped committing to positions when you needed to set up. I would either overcommit, have my shoulders way over in front of my toes, which made it harder to leave, or I would sort of undercommit and miss a spot and have to readjust my feet. Blake's way of thinking and his emphasis on stance actually was a breath of fresh air. And when we talk about the match that I just recently had, we can revisit this. But through Blake and his coaching, I was able to take my sample stage time from about 21 and change down to about 17 and a half seconds, all with acceptable hits, which is a titanically large pickup on raw time. And that's my biggest issue as a reforming carry optic shooter, is figuring out how to get that raw time down. And Blake's class paid off in spades. Blake has a curriculum book that he sort of sends with you. So there is a memento of the class where you can work on some of the drills that you work with him and kind of go through it together. But the round count was about 600 rounds, and it was ammo that was very well spent. I learned a lot, and as a result, my next match that I shot had a very pleasing result. So working with Blake kind of shifted my paradigm on what I'm working on in dry fire. I'm probably no different from a lot of you guys where you've got a small, like 1-bedroom sized room or 2-car garage type space where it's difficult to set up kind of moving pieces to work on, but it made me realize just how important that stuff was. And I basically stopped dry firing kind of my stand and shoot skills and only dry fired like moving entries and exits and things such as that. So shifting my focus with where I'm at as a shooter turned out to be a pretty good deal for me, and I feel very prepared kind of coming into my first major. Another thing that happened this month is Charlie Perez reached out and sent me his book, The Path of path of focused effort. There is no "the" in front. So from BigPandaPerformance.com, that's Charlie Perez's website. He is Charlie on the Brian Enos board. He is a cornerstone of the Brian Enos community. And if you spent any time at all over on the Enos board, you've probably brushed elbows with old Charlie. So Path of Focused Effort is a learning guide for practical shooting. It says so right there in the subtitle. And to that point, this is one of the better training manuals that I've read. But let me tell you about how I learn and understand things so you can understand whether it's going to work for you. If you find my method of instruction, if you watched any of my kind of instructional videos, you like kind of understanding the why and the mechanical type stuff, Charlie very much has that same sort of approach, that sort of engineer's mind to dissecting and analyzing things and really getting down to granular levels of detail. So if you're kind of a big picture guy, this probably isn't going to be for you. If you need a little bit more explanation to understand the why and the how, then I found this book to be amazing. Now, as a master level shooter, I didn't expect to pick up this book and have kind of like my hair blown back and just really had my eyes open. But what I did see is it gave me more of a vocabulary for concepts that I kind of already knew, but he did an excellent job explaining and kind of giving words to an understanding that I kind of already had. But that's not to say I didn't gain stuff from this, because I absolutely did. One of the biggest takeaways I had from the book, and this was, I mean, this is going to sound very basic, but it was kind of eye-opening to me, was that there are sort of two sorts of shooters. There is the stand and blast and run type shooter, and there's the more dynamic blend the position type shooters. So the guys who shoot really fast would probably be more of like the stand and blast kind of guys, and guys who shoot slower, who try and gain efficiency by staying and move perpetually across the stage, they can get away with shooting slower. I mean, that was just like a one paragraph thing in his book, but I never really framed it in that concept, and that was kind of an interesting thought to me, because thinking about all the shooters that I know, it's pretty clear that they all fall more or less in one. And he goes on to say, and rightly so, that you have to be able to do both. Like, just because you like to try and shoot slower and stay in motion doesn't mean you can't pin your ears back and grip it and rip it. In fact, you should learn how to do those skills, because they're going to be tested at major matches. There's lots of other good stuff in the book as well. He kind of analyzes grip in an interesting way, talking about the like absolute pounds of force required to grip a gun to control it in recoil. And he goes into kind of how he collected that data. But basically, you need to be putting out about 100 pounds of force. More is better if you're shooting like a limited gun. But, you know, even a minor gun or an open gun, it's still going to be about 100 pounds of force through each hand needs to be on the gun, which was an interesting thing to think about. Another thing that this book kind of gets into is the importance of sort of match day nutrition. And this is a concept that has been kind of done to death in recent years, but this book was published in 2018. So this was probably one of the first pieces of material to bring up the importance of nutrition at a match. Absolutely. A match is nothing but an endurance contest. Who can keep their performance up the longest? So it's one of the most important aspects of the game, and he kind of hits on it in the book. He talks about footwear. He spends 3 pages talking about picking the best set of iron sights for him. And what this book does better than any other manual that I've read is it gets you inside a GM's headspace and helps you see how they think about things and the amount of detail that goes into it. There are some voices out there who just kind of put out sort of the big picture thing and you just kind of figure it out. That's not what Charlie did. He made GM in I think 18 months, and he's been a GM for over 10 years, and he's been competitive at nationals for a good chunk of that as well. My biggest critique of the book is that it is not available on Amazon, which is where most people buy everything. So if you want to buy a copy of the book, you do have to go to his website to get it. It is an 8.5 by 11 book that is spiral bound on quality paper with color photographs. There's a lot of really good color photography in the book that really helps sort of illustrate the points that he's making in the book. So if you're newer, like say B class or below, I think this is a really good manual for you. I mean, even as an M-level shooter, I got several good nuggets out of this book that made it worth my time to read. It's about 130 pages. It's a pretty quick read, knocked it out in a few hours, and it was time well spent. So thanks, Charlie, for sending this in. And if you want to check out a copy of the book, you can go to BigPandaPerformance.com where he has these for sale. Another little mini training update is that the Bull Armory Ultimate Racer got an upgrade. I got a brass magwell for my open gun, so it changes the point of balance from being slightly muzzle heavy to almost perfectly balanced. It added about 5 ounces of weight to the gun, but it is a factory part. It is available, like, you can order it, I guess, with the upgrade parts or whatever. So this is Bull's Magwell for the Ultimate Racers, and I think it's great. I'm really happy with how the gun handles now. And speaking of the Ultimate Racer, the Ultimate Racer blew up at Blake Liles' class. That's right, I exploded my gun. And so for the handful of you guys who haven't seen John Wick 3 or aren't familiar with open guns, they fire a 9mm major load, which means the bullet is traveling about 30% faster than your off-the-shelf factory ammunition, which means it's a wildcat round that's generally not available commercially for sale. So if you want to shoot it, you kind of have to roll it yourself. I had a boo-boo and was using some old range pickup brass that hadn't been roll sized, and one of my cases ruptured, and I've got this really cool picture of the grip safety outlined on my hand. I didn't get a picture of it, but my support hand had the slide stop outlined in kind of black soot. But the whole experience, and I'm not being kind of like whistling past the graveyard on this, I realized a lot of things could have gone wrong. The whole experience was basically like somebody puffed a hairdryer at me with like some sand in it, and it hit me in the face. And that was the extent. I mean, the only toll on the gun that it suffered was the extractor claw got bent a little bit out of spec, so I had to replace the extractors. And the magazine base pad blew off the mag tube, so the lock plate, spring follower, and all the ammunition left in the magazine fell in a nice little pile on the ground. And that was really it. The gun really didn't care. I've shot, probably close to 1,000 rounds since the gun blew up, and it's back to 100% since I changed the extractor. And for the record, since I've tensioned 2 1911 extractors and I own a Dremel, I may or may not be the best, most qualified gunsmith in history. I'm not saying I am, but I'm not saying I'm not either. So in about 2 weeks at the time of recording, this is my first major. That's going to be double tap. The focus on that is going to be kind of charging targets and charging into positions while like shooting in. I think that's going to be kind of the last skill that I can work on before I have to just spend some time with the gun recoiling in my hand. And before we move on to the interview portion, and I've got a great interview for you guys this month, I want to talk to you about the D-Class people. D-Class, as I've been studying these matches to report to you guys on how things are going in the sport, D-Class is about as common as a Grandmaster. So my question to ponder is there a point to even having a D-Class? Because there's not ever enough people at a match to even warrant recognizing it with a trophy by most commonly accepted prize rules. So if there isn't a class that's big enough to be competitive with, like, what's the point in having the class? So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and comments. So should we nuke D-Class and just let C-Class go all the way down to 0? Or should we keep it around? I mean, it's not harming anything by being there, but it's also not doing anything by being there either. I guess it does provide that one little shot of serotonin for the person who climbs out of D-Class into C-Class. So there's that one string of carrot. It maybe makes it feel like the well isn't quite so deep to self-improvement. So maybe it does serve a function on kind of the game within the game in that regard. But as far as like actually competing at major matches and things like that, it's not doing anything. But it's honestly the same argument for why we should do away with limited 10. Like, there's never enough people at a match to recognize the winner, so why have it as a division? So this month on the interview, I'm revisiting Tony Wong, the GM26. I've already got a video interview with him up on the channel from when we roomed together at Nationals in 2020. And Tony's claim to fame is that he made Grandmaster in about a year in carry optics shooting an unmodified Glock 26. And his reasoning for choosing the Glock 26 is interesting. It's the gun doesn't make any of your sins go away, so it forces you to be better at shooting. So by shooting a gun that will punish you for bad technique, you can learn faster and get better. And it's honestly a breath of fresh air when I field so many questions on what gear should I get. I'm thinking about buying a Shadow 2 or whatever the best gun and whatever the best class is. People ask those questions all the time, but usually it's not the how can I get better at the game and learn how to use what I have. So Tony, by embracing constraints, had this amazing way of learning, and he finished at like 83% of max Michelle at number 23 in the nation or whatever, shooting a Glock 26. However, I am sad to report that Tony realized it wasn't his love of shooting, but it was his love of learning that he had going. So he's no longer a competitive shooter. He is now pursuing golf with the goal to become a scratch golfer using only one club, and that club is a 1-iron. Tony's a really interesting guy, and I hate that he's not a shooter anymore because I really enjoyed shooting matches with him and broing out. And he's a big fat jerk because he wouldn't give me all his primers he had left. I'm sure we can work something out. I mean, I can come get him if I need to, Tony. Just let me know, buddy. So before I play the clips for you, Tony has a really interesting take where he doesn't say you should like learn how to get better at sort of everything and gradually go faster. He's like, you should learn how to be safe and you should learn how to be able to hit anything on the range. And once you can hit anything on the range, you should be focusing on going as fast as you can safely go to learn how fast to go. And he says he's got a mathematical proof where he can prove it out that speed is better to work on than accuracy. He's just very flies in the face of all of the commonly held beliefs about it, but you can't really argue with his result and how quickly he rose to Grandmaster and still shot a pretty good Nationals in 2020. So as mentioned, Tony's take is once you have good fundamental marksmanship, that's when you can start working on building confidence, and that's when you start going fast, because Tony's take is that confidence is basically everything. Tony makes a pretty compelling argument that once you get into sort of the upper end of A class, M, and GM, the only difference between those three is really confidence and the ability to execute, so attempting to let yourself execute. I really enjoyed sitting down with Tony. He's a cool dude. I hope to keep in touch with him. But if you want to see the whole interview, you can see both the full unedited video interview as well as the audio only podcast on my Patreon page. There is a link in the show notes or description where you can join, and just for $1 a month, those posts will be unlocked for you.
But then as you progress, there's kind of like this crossing point between the understanding of where your skill is at and your confidence level. And then arguably, once you get to the deep end, right? Like everyone's skill, on a good day, you can have like a master, like a normal master shooter. It'd be like indistinguishable from, you know, just a GM, right? On a good day. But then what separates them on like the bad day, right? Is that consistency, and that usually comes from some sort of understanding of like a level of confidence that they have in their own ability. And I don't know, it's just I see a lot of people who are not confident in their ability, even though their abilities are good, like they're solid.
Yeah.
The person that's shooting open tells their mind to go faster because they can accept that speed, right?
Right.
What ends up happening really is they take the same amount of time to actually break the shot. The only difference is leaving the shot. So like a minor scorer or shooter might shoot the alpha and then like spend a little bit of time to confirm that it was an alpha.
Oh, that third sight picture?
Yeah, whereas an open shooter shoots the shot.
It wasn't off the paper, so keep going.
And then they just move on, right?
That's right, yeah.
But the time that it took to break the shot for both open and for minor and major is the same time. It's just the time to leave it.
Right.
So that's why the accuracy, there's no difference to it. I watch my videos and sometimes I'm like, I shoot so slow. And I could tell myself I could go much, much faster. And I just don't, even though I say this kind of information or try to like spread it out, is that even I don't really trust my equipment to a level where I should trust it. I should trust it even more. First thing, don't give a crap about your gear. Whatever you're shooting now is fine. I don't care if you're shooting a high point. Whatever you're shooting, it's good enough. Doesn't matter. You're at the bottom. You're trying to claw your way to the top, right? So it doesn't matter what you use. So for me, like before doubles, you want to make sure that you can actually shoot at a point that you're looking at. And so let's say you put, you draw like a circle, maybe like the size of a quarter, right? Put that start at 5 yards. And see if, given unlimited time, you can put every shot you want into that quarter. If you can't get to that standard yet, move it to 3 yards and see if you can do that, right? Because if you don't have a baseline of being able to shoot exactly where you want it to go, then you should be working on that first. Honestly, like the way I think about it, if your draw is 1.2 seconds or faster, like from the time you hear the beep to the first shot, right? That's good enough for what we do. If your reloads are 1.4 seconds, around that, that's good enough for what we do. If your splits are 0.2 of a second, good enough for what we do. Like, it doesn't have to be the most blazing cutting edge of everything. Because at the end of the day, it's not about who has the fastest individual skill, right? Or like individual movements for a particular thing for one stage that wins the tournament or the whole entire match. It's about who can consistently keep their performance over a string of rounds or a string of stages, right? So it's the consistency matters more than the time, but you should be able to be competitive enough. And for me, like, those standards are competitive enough. So let's assume that this person has figured out doubles. If you figured out doubles, right? Like, honestly, if you figured out doubles and you dry fire correctly, then you will by default be master. And I know that kind of sounds like, oh, that sounds super simple. Like, why isn't everyone a master, right? It's because there's a difference between it sounding simple versus it being easy. And the reason why doubles are fundamental is because nearly every stage that you shoot, the paper, you're putting 2 shots out on it, right? Unless if there's a special stage that you put like 3 or 4 or whatever. But usually you put 2 shots on all paper. So that's why doubles is fundamental to the sport. And then if you dry fire correctly, all it is getting used to you moving a gun from point A to point B. And once you get to point B, you're doing the doubles. And then after that, you're moving it from point B to point C. What are you doing when you get to that target? Shooting doubles, right?
Yeah.
So the only thing you need to do in live fire is your doubles. Everything else can be done
in dry fire.
I actually have a mathematical kind of like reasoning, or kind of like a proof, where it doesn't make sense to worry about accuracy when you're first starting out, as long as you're safe, right? And the reason is this, right? Let's say that someone theoretically shoots 90% of points, right? And they're new to the game. If that's the case, their time is probably going to be very slow, right? So imagine if you kept that same exact time, but increased their accuracy from 90% of points to 100% of points. They're still not winning the competition, right?
No.
So even if they maximize their accuracy, they'll at one point will have to face the reality of increasing their speed.
Yeah, it rewards efficiency, not accuracy.
So, but the thing is, if you look at it from the counter approach, where you focus on speed first, let's say that you're able to get to the speed of the fastest person, right?
Shooting 80% of points.
Like, oh no, well, if you're starting out, you're probably shooting like 60% of points. But if you can reach the fastest speed, shooting 60% of points, well, if you increased your hit percentage, right, to better than, or equivalent to the best shooter that day, then you're going to win that match. So you only have to worry about one factor.
So moving on to match news, we have our first results in from an area match. Area 6 was held in North Carolina. Before we get into what this year's stats were, there is sort of an alarming stat we need to look at. Now, I shot Area 6 back in 2017 when it was at the South River Gun Club in Atlanta, and there were over 600 shooters. And at Area 6 this year, there were only 380 shooters. So that is a steep decline from what we were experiencing 3 years ago. Granted, there is a kind of steep ammo situation that we're working through right now. There's the virus scare and all that kind of stuff. So that said, there is the question of what happened and why was there such a steep decline. What is sort of interesting, and you can look at these stats yourself, is that the number of high-level shooters who are showing up at matches, probably through attrition and more of the casual guys getting weeded out by not being prepared for a epidemic. The participation of M and GM level representative as a percentage is quite high now. So all of the divisions are quite strong with the good shooters who are still shooting. And all the divisions at Area 6 had between about 30 to 40% participation at the M or GM level, which is honestly insane. As far as the match mix is concerned, I gotta look at my notes here. It was 27% carry optics, 23% open, 16% limited, 14% production, and 13% PCC. So that is about a 63% optics versus irons category. And obviously 3 years ago when I shot Area 6, it was significantly skewed the other way. What is interesting about those numbers is just how far limited and production have fallen to 16 and 14% respectively. Limited was the division at Area 6 that had the least amount of masters and grand masters represented at a percentage in it. So it is interesting that limited is keeping sort of the character of the new guy division, while production still has its enthusiasts who showed up with a really deep pool of talent in production division. So open division was won by Ethan H., who had Chris Tilley from Top Shot Season 2 right there on his heels at 99%. Chris is also a national champion, which is why that joke works, but it was interesting to see Ethan put up such a strong match. Limited actually has a really interesting story at this match, as the match was won by Christian Seiler, who won open division for the past 2 years, won limited division at this match. And he beat John Browning from the AMU as well as Team Glock's Shane Coley in order to claim the title. And number 2 was 3.5% on his heels. 3.5% is a fairly sizable lead at that level of shooting. So that's very interesting to see that the best open shooter for the past 2 years is now doing well in limited, especially given the fact that Christian is a pretty compact guy. He's not your typical limited shooter who's all big and burly and still pretty fast. He's a smaller guy, and he's still managing that 40 caliber no problems. Then there's the Roadrunner shootout. In this match, I'm not really going to dive too deep into it because there wasn't any name brand talent there necessarily, and the field was more middle classmen than it was sort of the upperclassmen, people who were going to be competitive at nationals. But one thing that was really interesting about the Roadrunner Challenge, which is held in California, keep this in mind because it will become important. Despite this match being held in California, the match was absolutely dominated by high cap divisions. It was also dominated by optic shooters at 70%, but the high cap divisions is the thing that was interesting to me, because when everyone talks about the round capacity in production division, one thing they always talk about is, well, the mag capacity states, what about the Californias and the New Yorks and states like that? For the record, there were more limited 10 shooters at Area 6, which all the states in Area 6 are free states and there are no magazine capacity restrictions. There were more limited 10 shooters in Area 6 than there were at the Roadrunner. The Iron Sight Division's limited was only at 15% and production was only at 12%. So between limited 10, Revo, and single stack, that's all of the low cap divisions that you have represented, and they made up very, very little of the match participation in total, which is interesting considering California is a restricted state. And the Dragons Cup in Odessa, Texas, put on by Team Motley, had some of the high-level talent that you'll see at Nationals this year. They had Open Division, which was won by KCU Sabio. They had Production Division, which was absolutely stomped by JJ Ricazza. He ran away with it by nearly 20%. Carry Optics was won by Max Michel, as per always. Limited was carried by Gianni G, who shoots for Team Infinity. He's a junior shooter. He's a lot of fun to watch. And the percentages were actually very similar to what we're seeing across the country. So, limited is about 15%, production's just under 15%, and then basically optics are about 2/3 of the people shooting the sport between open, carry optics, and PCC. As far as news is concerned this month, there really was a pretty quiet month. There's nothing really of interest to competition shooters, except for one guy on YouTube published his video on the LOK Brass flashlight. This is basically a frame weight with a little tiny keychain light that's embedded into it that adds 7 ounces of weight to the dust cover of your gun. So this is one of the first prototypes that LOK has put together. These are going to be available for sale in the first week in May on their website if this is something you're interested in. Since I wasn't able to get the video put together on this since the flashlight showed up so late, that video is coming. I've done all the filming on the range. But I just wanted to talk about what it was, because the professional sort of pundit class in USPSA is still really upset about the flashlight rules, and I just wanted to spend some time talking about them. So the effect of putting a frame weight on your gun is, as you can probably imagine, on some guns it's going to be more advantage than it is on other guns. So I tested it on 3 guns when I took it to the range to shoot. I had the Shadow 2 optics ready, I had the Beretta Rodeo, and I had the Glock 34. And that's basically got a lightweight gun with a traditional tilt action, got a heavyweight gun with a traditional tilt action, and then you kind of have the oddball Beretta, which has the locking block action. And the results are kind of what you would expect. On the Shadow 2, I will say, the effect of putting brass grips on the gun, and honestly, the LOK Brass grips have the best texture of any grip that I have held. If I competed in carry optics division with a Shadow 2, I would use the LOK Brass grips in a heartbeat. they add, I think, like 8 ounces to the gun. And it's not so much about the weight and how heavy it is, but I mean, if you think about the balance of the Shadow 2, it's super dust cover heavy. And by putting all that weight in the grips, it really kind of balances it out. The gun just tracks a lot better. It feels like it's easier to swing since it pulls kind of the center of balance further back toward the trigger guard. And the texture that's on the grips is superb. I mean, yes, they sent the grips to me, but I'm giving you my honest opinion. Those grips are amazing. If you follow the channel also, they sent me a pair of their new Veloce grips. Veloce. I used to compete with my Berettas and Carry Optics last year. I used the LOK Veloce grips. They took that same pattern and put it on their G10. So if you're somebody who wants to maintain the moral superiority of not using brass grips, then the Veloce grip is probably a really good one to look at. I like that texture better than basically all the other ones that I've tried. I've tried the diamonds, I've tried the bogey, golf ball style pattern. I've tried a bunch of different textures of grip, and I prefer the brass grip texture. I wish he made a set in aluminum. That would be really awesome. But the Veloce would probably be my number 2 behind the brass for Shadow 2, guys. So there's another little mini review for you. The Shadow 2 with the brass grips on it balanced the gun so well, and it muted recoil wonderfully. It's not quite open gun levels of recoil, but it's not far off from that point. Like, I really like how the Shadow 2 handles with those brass grips. So I tried it with G10 grips on there, I tried it with the Streamlight TLR1, and I tried it with the LOK flashlight here. And this will all be in a much more in-depth video, but I did want to kind of talk about the light. The biggest thing that I just want to put out there is everyone always talks about, oh, your transitions are going to suffer. Your transitions are going to suffer. I didn't have any problems with my transitions with the flashlight on the gun in any of the formats that I tried, and I even tried the illegal brass grips with the brass flashlight, like I think it was 62 ounces on the Shadow 2 at that point. And my transitions didn't suffer at all. In fact, they cleaned up the precision. It's easier to stop the gun swinging onto the target. It's not that hard to get the gun moving as you let the gun lift and recoil. If you can transition the gun as the sight lifts, then this actually works as a really good set of brakes. I would say that it's easier to transition a heavier weight gun. That said, having a brass flashlight is going to present its own problems because nobody makes holsters for these things yet. So finding a holster that you can put your brass flashlight into is a problem. LOK is working on people. So if it sounds interesting to you to use a frame weight flashlight on your gun, then LOK is trying to get that problem solved for you. I'll share more with it when I put my video out. Hopefully he'll have some deals on holsters. But that all said, the one thing that nobody is really talking about this is, as an open shooter, I don't even keep my magazines on my belt when I'm just ROing or walking around resetting and stuff like that. I put them in my bag. I don't want any weight on my belt if I don't have to have it at the match, because a match, as we talked about earlier, is a big endurance contest. So adding half a pound to the muzzle of your gun that you're going to carry around in the summer or to early fall heat for 8 to 10 hours is going to add up. And I mean, I don't know you, but if you're somebody who fatigues easily, I gotta believe that this is gonna help erode your match performance late in the day, despite the fact that when you're fresh, it probably will be a performance boon. So that's one aspect of these things that is sort of interesting to me. There will be more of my thoughts on this in a video to come out later this month. As far as videos that you'd probably find interesting on the channel this month, we reviewed the Gugaribus GR Universal Holster. It's a locking race holster, so if you're in the US, it's for open or limited, and if you're in the rest of the world, you can use it in any division, but it's kind of interesting because you can fit literally any gun into the holster, and it works really well for a race holster. I reviewed the HK VP9L, which is supposed to be HK's competition gun, and the gun, while it's super accurate and shoots really well, it comes with magazines that are illegal in all of the competitions that I'm aware of, short of 3-gun. So while the gun is super accurate, it shoots pretty soft. The grip is possibly one of the best on a polymer gun that I have experienced. It doesn't come with optics plates, and as you can imagine, those are sold out everywhere because optics is the most popular thing in the division, as we've established. So why manufacturers are releasing guns that don't come with optics plates right now when everyone is shooting optics, especially in competition shooting, is insane. And the fact that we're still putting magazines that can't be used in competition with new guns is sort of crazy too. Canik did it back in the day when they released the TP9 SFX, but so did Sig Sauer when they released the Sig X5, because the original magazines didn't fit the carry optics mag gauge, and at the time 140mm wasn't even allowed in USPSA, so they basically gave you 4 worthless mags if you got one of the first X5. So HK is not alone. Lots of people have had boo-boos in that regard. There were 2 more of my technique videos in the Shoot Like a Boss series. I think we had reloads and draws, so if you want to save some time on your practical shooting, maybe check those videos out. And I think as far as the other stuff on the channel, on my B channel, there's like a cheap optic review. I shot an IDPA match, so you can watch the match video of me wearing a Hawaiian shirt, a photographer's vest, and sandals to shoot an indoor IDPA match. And that's kind of really all I had on the competitive front this month. I had one of my hard drives crash, so I had to get a backup so I could repair my existing drive, so I lost about a week of productivity. And to take us home on the memes front, guys, there really weren't that many good memes this month. Like, in fact, I can't really think of any good memes that I saw. So go fast, don't suck, hammer and sear. You guys really need to get your act together and put some better memes out there so we can talk about them. So if you've made it this far in the show, if you're on YouTube, I appreciate that thumbs up. Having engagement, YouTube counts that as a form of engagement, and that really helps the videos reach kind of be expanded, because the search is not how these videos are found. It's based around kind of engagement and user enjoyment. So the easiest way to let them know that you enjoyed the video is hitting that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. As I mentioned, I've got links for Patreon if you want the full reviews. And in the meantime, find me on Instagram or Telegram if you want to send me a message or whatever, and we can have a chat. Appreciate you guys. Catch you on the next one. Take care, guys.